Well, listen to this story. In the meantime, while we keep an eye on that, Royal Caribbean facing a class action lawsuit in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. And passengers say that the cruise line refused to let them rebook a trip to Jamaica and Mexico, despite the fact that it was scheduled to depart from the Texas coast at the height of Hurricane Harvey. The company was forced to cancel the cruise eventually. Some of those families ended up trapped in Houston for days. Their attorney says this, quote, "What Royal Caribbean did to these passengers is simply shocking. They knowingly placed families with small children directly in the path of one of the worst storms to hit the U.S. in centuries. We look forward to holding Royal Caribbean wholly accountable for its negligence." So let's bring in our panel. Fred Tisi is a former federal prosecutor, and Emily Campagno is a former federal attorney and a former criminal defense attorney. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Emily, I will start with you. Can the cruise line be held accountable for this? We hear about airlines canceling flights all the time, but what about cruise ships?
Right, they can absolutely be held liable. Frankly, this is a PR nightmare for the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line. So essentially, as everyone else on the planet knew that a Category 4 hurricane was barreling down the coast, Royal Caribbean refused to acknowledge it, even despite protests, even despite passengers' protests and inquiries all day, every day, saying, look, the port is closed, flash flood warnings are occurring, streets are closed, and flights aren't even going in. Instead, they still refused and held these passengers' monies hostage. Now, what happened essentially is that all the passengers still flew into that area on Royal Caribbean's word, and then were stranded there for a week. So all of them were out of pocket thousands of dollars because Royal Caribbean refused to cancel.
One family specifically, they said they spent, what, $4,500, Fred. We did reach out to the cruise line, to Royal Caribbean, but they have not gotten back to us with a comment. What do you think?
You know, I'm a little skeptical whenever I hear about class action lawsuits, and I'll tell you why. The bottom line is that everybody but the class members makes out on these deals. The defense lawyers, actually, the way these cases get settled is that the class members will get a voucher to go on for $3,000 to go on another Royal Caribbean cruise, so they can sit at the captain's table with Captain Steubing and drink overpriced wine that's not part of the voucher. Okay, the defense lawyers get paid a ton of money to defend them, and the plaintiffs' lawyers put in for millions and millions of dollars. So, you know, I always tell people, when you start to hear about class action lawsuits, you know, you're going to grab a clothespin for your nose. Having said all of that, unfortunately, what they did here, I think, was really, really stupid. And sometimes the only way to get these companies to listen is to file a class action lawsuit, so that the next time they may be a little bit smarter about it.
Yeah, I mean, the cruise was scheduled to depart on Sunday, August 27th. They kept insisting to these families. Many of them were coming from out of town, as you said, Emily. They were flying in. They kept insisting it is going to depart on time, regardless of a Category 4 hurricane moving in. And then the day after it was supposed to depart, they canceled it altogether. So in terms of monetary value, what could they get? Because I understand that the cruise line is giving them something of a refund. Emily?
Right. So what these, correct. And what these passengers are seeking is essentially, they're seeking recompense, all of the money that they spent, especially stranded, but now they're seeking extra. And that's the problem that these situations create, is that by not mitigating it or managing it on the front end, then what ends up happening is that the ship is going to be liable and on the hook for so much more money than that they had just canceled to begin with. Now, I foresee them settling. It will not get to a jury. Obviously, Royal Caribbean will settle, but because of their refusal to mitigate, they will be on the hook for compensation a lot higher than they want.
I did see, Fred, something that they tweeted out. This was from Royal Caribbean, and it was back and forth between one of the passengers who was canceled. Royal Caribbean said, "We hope the refund you're receiving will help to alleviate some of your expenses." And then the passenger said, do you understand what alleviate means? And then they said, "I'm really sorry for what happened."
Right. Now, Emily's right, but ultimately what these cases do is that's what the plaintiffs get for. Remember now, this isn't everybody that was booked to go on the cruise line. This were people who flew into Houston to get onto this trip. People who were already in Houston obviously can't be a member of the class because they were already there. And so ultimately, and I can tell you from years and years of flying airplanes, you know, the weather is an iffy thing. I mean, in retrospect, yes, Hurricane Harvey blasted into Texas.
Yeah.
But 4 or 5 days beforehand, nobody was quite sure exactly where it was going. So I'm not trying to defend them, but, you know, hindsight's 20/20.